Oh man, I've been having some great insights this last couple months. It's the kind of thing where I think, oh, I'll make a video about this, and then I get more insights, and it sort of compounds, and then at some point it just seems so profound. On the other that it's difficult to explain the whole process. On the other side, it's so simple. It's like everybody already knows this. So I don't know. I've tried to make a couple of videos, but today I'm making a video. It's all about the structure. Well, structure of magic. Back in the 70s, this is 75, Bandler and Grinder, they studied some psychology and came up with neurolinguistic programming. Essentially, they were studying people who got results and taking notes, figuring things out. And so this book, Structure of Magic, it's all about transformational grammar. It's kind of a grammar manual after a certain point. I mean, literally, like, it has grammar diagrams and stuff. It's pretty nice. So I just read the first chapter. I actually I've had this, I already have a copy of this in Nebraska or Missouri, but I bought this for a guy who is going to start working for me. He's going to teacher college, and he has to study grammar. And I said, well, grammar, you should check this book out. So I got on eBay, it's so cheap, some of these books. I just had it sent. I'm just going to give it to him. But it's really great. So chapter 1, I mean, this is all stuff we really should know. Essentially, there's this concept, a map is not the territory. Science and sanity. A map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. That's one of the great axioms of neurolinguistic programming. The map is our representation of the world. Our story about what things mean to us. That's the map. And we interact with the map, we don't interact with reality. So we come across things in our reality, and because of our former experiences and our beliefs about these things, we assume that these things mean this or mean that. And it talks about here how we generalize, we delete, and we distort the world around us. Our perceptions of reality is either generalized, distorted, or deleted, selectively perceived as a way of that's how we manage the story of what things mean to us. Our model of the world, our paradigm, our map of reality is what we interact with. And to get that understanding that we function with a model of reality and not reality itself, to get that awareness gives us a foothold in modifying our map to be more accurate or more useful. Because let's face it, because our maps and our models get us results, we can selectively believe certain things as a way of propelling ourselves forward. Like the self-fulfilling prophecy. You can believe really positive, powerful things about yourself, and then you will find that reinforcement in your perceptions. And it's best in a lot of ways to be pretty accurate. If a car is coming down the street, you don't want to get hit by a car. But on the flip side, if you're going to be taking yourself into the future with a great project that requires a lot of effort, to believe certain things about yourself and the project and the effort, even if they're not entirely accurate, because it's a lot of subjective stuff, I mean, sometimes it's better to have a functional model than an accurate model, in my opinion. And this is really good stuff, So it says basically our psyches have these 3 levels of constraint, or these 3 categories of constraints. There's the neurological constraint, meaning we actually perceive with our eyes certain colors. Without tools, we can't see ultraviolet or infrared. So, or radio waves for that matter. So our perceptions are limited to a spectrum. And generally speaking, all people have those same neurological constraints. Like, we have more nerves on our fingers than we do on our arms. So if you touch a pin several millimeters apart, a person would be able to perceive that as being touched in a different place. But in the upper arm, we have fewer nerves. So if you touch and then you touch again, several millimeters, it'll feel like the same place. That's the example, kinesthetically speaking. The human race basically has the same neurological constraints in a healthy adult, and we can only hear, between 20 cycles per second and 20,000 cycles per second. Anything below that, like elephants can talk that low, but we can't hear that low, so we don't interact with the world on that level. And the next type of constraints we have on our psyches, on our basic map of the world, are the social constraints. So in here there's an example that some cultures have fewer color categories than others. And so the theme here is that this is this is blue, and this is kind of teal, a teal green color, but some cultures would group those together as the same color. And even though it would seem to me sensible to think that they could perceive the richness, even though they have a more limited language, the research seems to show that with a smaller vocabulary, we have a smaller experience. As we generalize, we use some of the social constraints. What are some other examples here? The function of the brain and nervous system is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge. Our ways of perceiving, our language, our accepted ways of perceiving, and all socially agreed upon fictions are the social filters. The filters which come from our social existence. Our language is a filter of our experience. Our accepted ways of perceiving. You get the PC culture, and people aren't comfortable about perceiving race differences or cultural backgrounds. Like, I was at Burning Man some years back, and this guy from England, he was an Indian guy. He had Indian background from India. But, he looked like he could have been from any number of cultures. And I said, "What's your family background?" And he was like shocked for a second. And he explained to me that that's rude and socially inappropriate in England to ask that. And I'm an American, and it happens to be a relevant part of his existence, and I'm relating to him. So, so we definitely had different social filters in that regard. And the third one is the individual filter, and just like anything else, a person's experiences are unique to them own self. Two people can have the same experience, and based on what things mean to them, they experience it differently. One person might have endearment for another person, while another person might have fear and hatred for that person, based on the same experience. And our experiences are reciprocal, especially with other people. Someone does something and I'm angry, that anger is reflected. Someone does something and I'm amused, that person's either what? Maybe they're going to be insulted by having someone laugh at them, or maybe they're going to feel like really good and connected because the other person's amused. So it's reciprocal. It's always reciprocal when you're dealing with people. But these individual constraints, as they call them, individual constraints, is just such a magnificent cornucopia of things we can tweak in our own selves. Like here, it talks about someone can fall off a rocking chair a couple times, and if they accidentally generalize, that all chairs are dangerous if you lean back in them. They will have a restricted map of the world, whereas somebody else might realize only rocking chairs are dangerous if you lean too far back in them. So rocking chairs are safe. Chairs in general are safe. But if you lean too far back in a rocking chair, that's unsafe. Whereas another person, theoretically speaking, could equate that all chairs were unsafe all the time, because every time they sat in a rocking chair, it fell backwards. So how do we enrich our maps of the world? How do we enrich our maps of the world? So many ways, right? We dream rich maps. We critically think about what things mean to us. And there's a real special semi-meditative state. It's always helpful to have another person help you with these things, because you can let your mind play out and work with it. If you self-analyze yourself, it's like you need to take a witness out and then not judge the mind's reactions to the questions, and ask the mind questions and allow it to progress, and then observe these things and the richness of these things to notice where these ideas can be adjusted, expanded, etc. But if you ask these questions and then you're embarrassed or you seize up because you think what's being given is inappropriate, it's confounding. So when you self-analyze, there's this, I guess, semi-meditative trance-like state where you can let the mind express itself and not judge that as being good or bad in the moment. If you think about the three minds, it's almost like we're asking this deep part of ourselves for an answer with the most refined, slow intellect. I mean, our primal self is sensory, immediate, and our intellect is much more it just takes a minute for things to process, but it has a lot more refinement. So it's almost as though you're using your intellect to get your primal self to express itself, and at the same time preventing your emotional self from making emotional judgments. The emotional self is engaged with that primal stuff. Like, you have your primal expression, and then your emotional is like a flame coming off of that, while your intellect is observing and asking questions. But if the intellect judges and the emotional part reacts to that judgment, then it will disrupt this thing that's being observed. And so it's really an art to be able to be detached intellectually from your emotional self. And while I don't think it's right to give your sort of primal emotional self free rein in all cases, in a self-analytic way, it's important to give it the freedom to express, because those expressions are sort of processes. This happens, then that happens, then this happens. And if you catch yourself in a moment, it's like, oh, reverse that, observe that, reverse that. What is the equation here? Why was there this shift in energy? There's some sort of deep-seated stimulus or something. And you can uncover stuff like that, but it's really a matter of having that level of detachment. But anyway, I love the mind. I'm such a fascinated, curious student of the mind. These ancient teachings, for a long time they seemed antiquated and out there. And the more I've studied the mind and get an inside view critically, I see, oh, these are maps of how to interact with the most common experience, which is our basic being, our awareness and thinking. You have the Chinese concepts, you have the Vedic concepts, the Taoists, the Buddhists. I mean, they all have language that is, Terence McKenna said, if you want to evolve, we need to evolve our language. And I read this book by Swami Shivananda Saraswati. You can look it up, PDF, free, just get it. Mind, Its Mysteries and Control. And in this book, there's a lot of Sanskrit terms that are not defined in the text, but in the back of the book, there's a glossary that's really fine. And so, reading through the book, I was looking at the glossary sometimes 3 times per page. And what this was doing was building up my vocabulary of these terms. He could have simply put in the English words and I would have gained some understanding. But having a special term for these concepts was really helpful. And by learning some of these Sanskrit words as components of the psyche, my ability to think about these things was enhanced. I really recommend that book, Mind, Its Mysteries in Control, by Swami Shivananda Saraswati, Divine Life Society. That book changed my life, I'll tell you that much. Changed my life. It was like under $4, and sometimes I look at it and I still have it. I open it up, I see the price in there, $3.75. I think I hemmed and hawed about that book for a week. It was at the used bookstore. If I hadn't bought that book, my whole life would have been different. I may have found Vedic philosophy eventually, but that book changed my life. Language, it's a big part of our existence. It's something we share. And so, like, right now, when people are like, all this bullshit, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, language evolves, but to expect people to upgrade their language instantly and hold it against them if they don't, it's like the other day I was talking with some people, or it was a couple months ago now, and I was talking about hermaphrodite, the concept, I was talking about hermaphrodites for some reason, and this girl took big offense, and she said it's now intersex. Well, that's fine. If you want to upgrade that, that's fine. But like, I guarantee you 90% of the population, if I said intersex, they would have no concept of what I was talking about. Whereas if I said hermaphrodite, they would understand perfectly. Because that's an actual word in our language. Now, it is up to us to evolve language. But this sort of weird expectation and shaming of people for using the words, it's like ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But, it's also all right. It's just funny to me. I don't mean to be dismissive of the effort, but like, okay, whatever. I don't know. We got language. I'm so glad we have English. English is nice. I love it.